Yeah, I never really thought divorce was an option, but then when you're going through difficult times in your marriage, you thought, well, maybe it is an option.
Maybe.
I don't think we ever thought it to be an option, one, because we're both too stubborn just to give up. But I mean, we had a rough patch to where it was like, okay, are we going to be able to pull through this? You know, not, oh, let's just call it quits.
Michael and I talked about that actually when we got engaged, that divorce never would be an option, but within like the first year of marriage, we didn't realize why so many people get divorced, because it's a lot harder than we thought it would be.
Yeah. And we actually had that conversation, and we agreed before we got married. The word would never be brought up, the situation. We were all in.
But I think it's really amazing how quickly Satan can bring that back around, and for it to even become a thought.
It's not an option. Just learning more about what God has, his plan for marriage, what that's supposed to look like, and what a covenant means, and all this. That stuff, we just didn't have a good understanding of that to begin with, and now I think we have a better understanding, and it's not an option. Yeah, you have difficult times, it's still not an option.
We're gonna annoy each other for the rest of our lives. That's basically.
Love is an action, not a feeling. So.
Well, that's awesome. It's great to see those couples be transparent and share things with us and kind of let us into their life. Today we are talking and continuing to talk about from this day forward. So we're praying that you receive encouragement and hope through this, that no matter what you've been through, there's great things ahead. But also when you look back to what you maybe thought marriage was about, I know not everyone in here is married, but when you're younger and you're thinking about it, questions and how you would answer those things. And some of you were planning your wedding as girls, and some of you guys were planning nothing. And so I have a couple of questions that were asked a few kids. A kid by the name of Kirsten, age 10, was asked, how do you decide who to marry? She said, no person really decides before they grow up who they're going to marry. God decides it all the way before, and you just find out later who you're stuck with. So then Derek was asked this question, age 8, how can a stranger tell if two people are married? You might have to guess based on whether they seem to be yelling at the same kids. So that's actually a pretty good way. Lori, age 8, was asked, what do you think your mom and dad have in common? They both don't want any more kids. And lastly, Pam, age 7, was asked this, when is it okay to kiss someone? When they're rich. Okay, that's good. When they're rich. She's got some good perspective, because you can marry more money in a minute than you can make in a lifetime. That's not the best advice ever, but one of my mentors did tell me that. So, my wife didn't even own a vehicle, so I married for beauty. It worked out really well. So, anyways, I just dug a hole that I don't know that I'll be able to get out of. And I am not saying that in the next service in which she will be. So, no, but from this day forward is about looking forward to the things that God has ahead for us, whether we're single, whether we're married, just even in general about relationships, and pulling principles out of his word for how we can live, because God has a lot to say about relationships in the Bible. And what we know is a great marriage is possible, but it's not probable if we continue in the same pattern in which we're living. Meaning this, that if we continue with the way that culture says marriage should be or what it should look like, we know that the divorce rate is significantly high, not just in culture and around the world, but specifically even within those who would call themselves Christians. And so looking at what God has to say about it is really important. In week 1 of the series, we talked about seeking God, okay? To seek God, because a better me makes for a better we. So we got to look at our relationship with God first. Next, we talked about fighting fair and how to handle conflict and active listening. Then Nate last week talked about having fun, and most of the guys really liked that message, especially the part about belly button to belly button. They kind of forgot the first 28 minutes of it. But there were some great principles in there about sex and what God has to say about this. What we're going to do is, following what we talked about last week, we weren't able to complete the discussion because there's so much in regards to that. Next week, we're talking about staying pure. So this is towards all men, women. How do we keep a pure mind? What do we do? What shouldn't we do? Married or single, it doesn't matter specifically, but how to be pure in the way that we live our life. This week, we're talking about never giving up. And if you have your program, we've got some notes in there. We're trying to really make this practical so you can take some things home with you. And there's scriptures that you can read throughout the week, but there's also blanks that you can fill in so we can walk away with some key things. So in this idea of never giving up, I know this, that the vows that are quoted at most weddings when it says, to have and to hold from this day forth, for better, for worse, for richer and poorer, in sickness and in health, so help me God. Because we really need God's help to fulfill the vows that we've committed. And most of you that are married in here, or maybe you're dating, you're probably dating or married to someone who is opposite of you, right? Someone who complements you, not completes you. Because when you're dating, opposites attract. But when you're married, opposites attack, okay? So when you're dating, it's like, oh, that's so cute, man. I love it when he does that. And then when you're married, you're like, you're probably the most annoying person in the world, It totally changes and shifts. So let me just ask a couple of questions. How many of you, married or single, you're the punctual one? You're always on time. The time matters to you. Okay, how many of you, you're not even, it doesn't even matter. You'll get there when you get there. Like, you don't even want to raise your hand right now. You're like, why are you making me raise my hand? Who is a planner? Who would raise their hand and say, I'm a planner? Okay, then who would raise their hand and say, why? Like, why plan? Why plan? God's going to work it all out. Who would say, I'm a saver? I'm a saver. I'm a spender. Okay? If we pass the offering basket, we would find you. Okay? But we don't. We just have boxes at the hall, in the halls there. But there's a big difference between each of us in relationships. Maybe some of your best friends are exactly opposite of you, and there's that complementing that takes place. But we have to make, no matter how different we are, or how similar we are, or how easy things are, or what space our marriage is in right now, we need to press towards never giving up, and we need to kind of get away from disposable relationships. Period. Get away from disposable relationships. We often teach our kids, at the first little struggle that they have in a friendship, you know what, you just don't need them. If they're going to act like that, and we teach them maybe at a young age to push people away, instead, when God says, hey, work through those things. Work through difficult times in a relationship, in a friendship, in a marriage, sometimes even at work. If we decide to, quit our job every time that when the going gets tough, we get to going, to press through it, to never quit. Here at Rock Harbor, we have a huge heart for marriages, and in January, we're starting Rock Harbor Marriages, which is a ministry within Rock Harbor. We'll be utilizing groups and leadership and stories and mentors in order to accomplish quite a few things in marriages. Our desire as a church is to stand in the way of the tearing that happens within marriages as they begin to break off. We want to stand in the way to keep them together, to never quit on your marriage, to be alongside of you. Our desire is that we would bring people not just inside Rock Harbor to receive marriage help, but to see more than 50% involved in Rock Harbor marriages outside of Rock Harbor, so that we can be a resource to the community. So when people think in our community, hey, I'm having some struggles in my marriage, what do? They know we can contact Rock Harbor. Rock Harbor Marriages will do something for us. And we're going to do a 3-prong approach. The first one is merge. This is for premaritals. This is people that are seriously dating or are engaged. We want to get to the relationships even before they're engaged, because once grandma has a plane ticket and the dress is bought, it's like, hey, I know we fight the whole time, and I know our premarital didn't go that well, but we've got a date on the calendar and we put a deposit down. Okay? Our desire is to get into that relationship before that and do front end work on it. Okay, and then following that, we move into foundations, which are marriages 0 to 7 years that are looking to build that foundation that can happen through Christ and other young couples and build community within that. And then re-engage. These are for struggling marriages. Any marriages that are later, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 20 years that are struggling, and that's called re-engage. And our desire is to come in and say, hey, do not quit. Let's talk. Do not quit. Let's talk. And our desire is to see these relationships renewed, because the pain that comes, many of us have been impacted by divorce, whether it's a personal divorce that we went through, a marriage that failed, or it's something that we've seen happen with our parents or siblings or friends. It changes not just the couple, it hurts the entire community around, kids, neighbors, friendships. And so my prayer is today, and we prayed before the services today and spent most of our prayer time praying for marriages and for those who have been divorced. Because here's what I know. If you've dealt with it personally or you've been impacted by it, the amount of guilt and shame that Satan brings upon us in those times is astronomical. And we do not want today's message on never giving up to come across in any way shameful or guilt-driven. Remember, we're talking about from this day forward. If we had a second to talk through each story of people that are in here, and even with our online audience, the things that we've been through is extremely painful, excruciating. The hardest days of our lives have been lived within marriage and within divorce and the pain that comes along with that, because we're talking about two sinful people that have been united together, and we've made contracts out of our marriages, and we walk away when things get tough, and we step away from things as it gets difficult. I do want to make it known that in marriage, the Bible is very clear, and maybe you were in an abusive relationship or there was some abandonment that was involved. I want you to know that maybe for many of you, it wasn't something you decided, it was decided for you, decided around you, and that pain has haunted you. I just want you to know that God is with you in that, and the Bible is very clear. If you're in an abusive relationship, we as a church have come alongside many women specifically that have dealt with abuse and supported and helped family, that we're not saying that you just need to never give up. Just stay in it. Just keep letting him treat you however he wants to treat you. What we would say is there's a space for separation, for counseling, and prayerfully restoration. But if that does not happen, you need to be safe. And so that's important for us to share. The Bible also talks about abandonment and specifically adultery, that God sometimes restores these things and sometimes restoration cannot be found. But we do not want guilt to be heard. That is such an immense prayer of our heart, that you would hear the grace of God and the plan that he has for all of us moving forward. Well, Jesus was walking. It's in Matthew 19. He was communicating with a group of people, and the Pharisees came along and said, hey, let's test him. Let's ask him about divorce. Because in this day and time, as Jesus was talked to about this, like there was divorces happening all the time. There were people, what we would say a no-fault divorce, meaning just like in all 50 states in the U.S., you can file for divorce without listing a reason. So just say, hey, irreconcilable differences, we can't get along, it doesn't really matter. And the same thing was happening. And the sad part was women were treated like property. So men would literally walk around with this paperwork in their pocket and almost threaten their spouse to do this, this is what I expect, this is what I deserve, and then treated women, almost their wife, the one that they've made covenant with, almost like, hey, disposable. It's a disposable relationship. And so there was controversy going on, and Jesus was called out to answer this question. So here's how he responded to it. First, the question specifically was this: is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? Jesus responded and said, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And then said, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife. The two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. Jesus completely raises the standard. He doesn't just specifically talk about marriage. He says, no. What God has joined together, let no man separate. It's almost as if he's saying, hey, you got a piece of paper here and a piece of paper here. This represents the two becoming one. Let's put a bunch of glue in the middle, clear up to the edges so it's impossible to get these two pieces of paper apart. And what we do, and what God has made one, we try to unone. And the tearing apart of those papers is painful and is discouraging and is hurtful, and it never feels like God could restore that. God comes in with his grace and brings restoration, but they were looking at it as if these relationships were disposable, and that's not how God designed marriage. So we have to say, what does God say about it? These are Jesus's very words. And we have to press into a difficult, not so easy topic in order to understand what does it mean to never give up? Because we know that Jesus was faithful into the very end, into the end of the age. He finished his calling. So how do we be faithful? How do we be strong and courageous, knowing that he will never leave us, nor he will never forsake us? So how can we emulate that in our life? Well, I can tell you this, in our marriage, it comes down to, are we going to have a contract marriage or a covenant marriage? A contract marriage or a covenant marriage. The word covenant is directly from the Lord. In Hebrew, it's the word berith. It means to cut. To cut. See, in the Old Testament, as they did weddings, what they would have is a big venue like this, lots of people, and it wasn't like a 45-minute ceremony, like, when's this pastor guy going to be done with this thing? I got to get to Costco. It wasn't that kind of a situation. It was like when you showed up, you showed up. It was a feast from the east, and you were just hanging out. That didn't make any sense, but thanks for laughing. But they would put half of the bowl over here and the other half over here. They take half of the goat over here and the other half. Oh, there's more people? Another half of a bowl, and it represented that these two were actually one. It's the two joining together. And some of you are like, that's super creepy. That is not what I dreamed of when I was 8. So probably true. And some of you hunters are like, that's what I'm talking about. Let's talk about the beef. Let's talk about the food. Let's get this out there. What they would also do is they would simply cut their hands. So they would cut the groom's hand and cut the bride's hand. And when they held hands, the blood would intermix, and it was an illustration. I know, weird, huh? Super weird. But it had a purpose behind it, and they would tie a rope around saying, hey, I am yours. Who I am is who you are. You're part of me. There's nothing that can ever change this. I am part of you. Because it was a covenant. Because there's a covenant that's talked about and that was promised that was to come. The covenant of Jesus, where Jesus was laying his life down for us, and his blood was poured out for us. It was about serving one another. It was a different type of way. It was a different covenant. It wasn't the contract covenant that said, hey, I'm in it as long as it's beneficial for me. It was saying, I'm in this forever. And I know that there's pain. I know that there's difficult things. And I once again want to say, I don't want us to hear that if we've been through a failed divorce, that there can't be restoration in our life. There's healing and there's grace. But what we need to know is this is really, really important that God makes mention of it multiple times in Scripture. It's represented to the point that Jesus, when he says, this is the new covenant of my blood. This is me pouring my life out for you. It's a covenant relationship. It involves vows, and it has a focus of forever. Not a for now, not as long as this works for me. What I know about the premarital that I got, my wife and I, as we sat down and we talked to our pastor, said, hey, would you do some premarital counseling? He said, sounds great, come in Tuesday at 1 o'clock. We show up, and I said, hey, how many times are we going to meet? And he said, we're going to meet one time. I was like, oh, we're going to meet one time. Everything right now? He goes, yep, 90 minutes. I'm like, oh, really? He goes, yeah. Pops a ghetto blaster out. A ghetto blaster, bro. 1980s. Pops it out. By the way, it was like 1997. But anyways, he pops it out, puts a cassette tape in it. He goes, we got 90 minutes on this bad boy. Hits record. He said, you want session 2? You listen to what I said in session 1. You want session 3? You listen to what I said in session 3. I'm like, okay, that sounds pretty good to me. I didn't understand the fullness. And here's what I said to him. I was like, thank you, bud. His name was Bud. Okay, Pastor Bud. Super awesome. The church we went to had 3 glow-in-the-dark crosses that looked like a bar. It was really cool. He buttoned his shirt undown to here. The hair was popping out, gold chains. I am not exaggerating. And that was a great 90 minutes. But one thing that I don't remember him saying or I don't remember hearing is don't ever threaten divorce. Don't ever threaten divorce. Because here's the thing. We often use those terms like I'm out. I'm done. I can't take it anymore. I'm leaving. We say things like that. Hey, what if in our relationships there was security in our relationship, knowing that even though we're in conflict, even though we're having a really difficult time, guess what we can do? We're safe. We can fight for our marriage in those hard times. But if there's always this thought in your mind that they're going to leave, there's always this thought that, well, we can't talk a little bit longer, or we can't have one more counseling session because it's going to push them overboard because they're going to leave. The security that comes with I'm not going to leave and we're going to work through this, I'm not giving up, changes our relationships drastically. And that's what a covenant is. That's what a covenant is. It's saying I'm here through thick and through thin. A contract marriage says this. A contract marriage wants to protect my rights and avoid my responsibilities. I want to protect my rights and avoid my responsibilities. A covenant says, hey, I'm going to give up my rights and I'm going to pick up my responsibilities. I'm giving up rights and I'm picking up responsibilities. We often say things like, I don't deserve to be treated like this. I didn't expect it to be this way. And then I read scriptures that say that I'm supposed to love my wife like Christ loved the church. That's a high standard. He poured himself up. He was the new covenant. He poured out his blood for us. He gave of himself for us. It's rooted in service. It's rooted in, I am here. My relationship, my desire is to pour into you and to offer myself up for you. Because the greatest relationships that you'll ever experience in life is between two servants. Think of your greatest friends. You're willing to do whatever in those friendships. You'll help them move. You'll help them clean their garage. That might be taking it too far, honestly. But you're there for them. And in your marriage, it's the same thing where you're looking for ways that you could serve one another. John 15 says, greater love has no man than this, than to lay down his life for a friend. To say, you matter to me more than what I would like to do. Finding a way to, in a covenant relationship, to put another person's interest is in mind. To say, hey, what you want is more important than what I want. A contract says, hey, I'm going to pursue personal convenience. I'm going to keep my personal convenience in mind rather than someone else's interest. 1 Corinthians 13 explains it really well for us and says, love is patient and is kind. It does not envy or boast. It's not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. And it carries on and says, love endures all things and hopes all things. You hear that often at weddings. Maybe you've heard that called the love chapter. I want to give you just a little bit of homework. I know last week, Nate gave us a 3x5 card and said, hey, write down 3 things that you would like to see improved in your marriage. I took that card home. I took 2. I got one for my wife, and I slid it across the table to her. And guess what? That was the last time we talked about it on Sunday night. We didn't fill out our paper. So here's some more homework for those of us that are behind by a week. What if we took that scripture and said this? Love is patient. Am I patient? We practice our active listening and we let them respond. Love is kind. Am I kind? Love is not irritable. Am I irritable? I mean, really, am I that irritable? How, on a scale of like 1 to 2, how irritable am I? I'm not trying to start fights, but it might, okay? So maybe you work through like 1 or 2 and then go to the next couple. But really, if this is the description of what love is and what it means to have the unconditional love of Christ, we need to really look at this and ask ourselves some hard questions. And I love how the chapter begins to wrap up in verse 11. It's like the knockout punch. It says, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I gave up my childish ways. Wow. We got to grow up. In order to never give up, we've got to grow up. Because we love those stories about someone having the fortitude and the perseverance to continue. I mean, the BSU game last night was incredible, you know? You don't have to clap, because seriously, guys, there's at least 2 Idaho fans in here, okay? We don't want to offend them. And so, okay, 3. And an Idaho State fan. So go Bengals. Fighty, mighty, mighty Bengals. But think about it like this. We love those kind of stories. But we have to be willing to do the work for it. But if we act like a child and we continue in our childish ways and we don't grow up, I think about like my kids when they were younger. Like my twins, one time we could hear them jumping on the bed and they're supposed to be asleep. We just hear them, we're like, they are having a blast. I want to go see what they're doing. And so I bang up the stairs, boom, boom. I get on the door, boom, boom. All of a sudden, it goes quiet. You know, they scatter like ants, you know, like gone, like cockroaches. Twin cockroaches, you know, and they're quiet, and I give them enough time to get quiet. I open up the door. Their covers are everywhere. All that's left is like the mattress pads, and they're like sleeping. But they're breathing like they just jumped a marathon, you know, like how childish is that? But how do we act the same way? We like think that our wives can't figure things out, or we think our husbands can't figure things out, that we're not really engaged in the marriage. We're not really loving the way that Christ would love. We're allowing the irritations of this world to come into our life. We're pouring into our kids, but we're not pouring into our marriages. It says to grow up. In order to not give up, we have to first choose to not, that we're going to grow up. I'll never forget, we were 4 years ago, there was about half this many people in this auditorium. We just had one service. And this gentleman came up to me and he said, hey, my wife and I are celebrating our 58th wedding anniversary and I would love to renew our vows. And so he was thinking like some little celebration somewhere or something. And I said, hey, bro, let's do it on Sunday. He goes, seriously? I said, yeah, I haven't even worked on my message. It sounds like a great idea. He's like, okay, cool. And so I come out, I do the message, I slide off. Doug's out here like, glory to God in the highest. You know, he's doing some song or whatever. I come back out in a full suit and everybody's like, I knew you could dress up. You know, I come back out in a suit. I got the shoes on. I got my Bible. I was like, I'd like to call Ori and Bert up to the front. And Bert's like, what? So she comes out and they sat in the middle. Come on, Ori, sit on the edge. You know what's coming, bro. Nope, in the middle, climbing, flipping, rolling over people. They get up here and she goes, what are we doing? She's like asking me. I'm like, Ori or Bert, chill. Just chill. Hold on a second. Ori wanted to renew his vows to you. You guys have been married 58 years. And he wants to express his love to you. And she goes, I didn't even dress right. I said, no, you dressed just fine. You dressed to eat cookies because we had cookies after every service because no one came and we could afford them. Now we can't afford cookies, but they're sitting here and I remember these words. Ori, do you still take Bert to be your lawfully wedded wife? And he said, yes, with tears coming down his face. And I said, Bert, you're not dressed appropriately, but Bert, do you still take Ori to be your lawfully wedded husband? And she said, yeah, I do. They've been married 62 years to this day. And she can't drive and her eyesight's been struggling and he drives her around and you can usually see him sitting out there on the concrete slab. He goes and gets her a coffee, mixes up the potion and brings it to her and she drinks it and you just see a heart of service that continues to this day. Because two people, they have their own ways that they could be going, have chose to serve one another, to put someone else first. The marriages that I've seen fall apart are generally centered on selfishness. When I've seen an affair take place, it's because someone is saying, my expectations are not being met, or I'm not satisfied, and so I'm going to chase after this. And there's often a lot of brokenness in past and different things that have happened. I've seen it where neglect takes place and saying, you know what, I would just rather do these things, so I'm not going to prioritize you. I've seen it, maybe it's been, a lot of different things just within abandonment, or people saying, you know what, I don't want to go to counseling, you want to go. But the pride that's involved by saying, I'm not willing to do the hard work, and I know it would mean a lot to you, but I just don't want to. And if we can't figure this out, we don't need someone else to tell us our problems. I just want out. Maybe it's finances and saying, I know we said richer or poorer, but this isn't what I'm wanting. This isn't working. I'm just going to start over. I just want to break from it all. We can't agree on parenting. I've seen it all happen, and generally it's at the core is selfishness. So we have to say, am I willing to make a covenant? Not a contract, not I'm in it as long as it's working for me. But to look at what we're giving in our marriages rather than just complaining about what we're getting. And some of the responsibilities that we're supposed to pick up and the rights that we're supposed to give up, I want to close with. The first right that we need to give up is the right to priority. See, when you're single, you can focus on yourself. You can have some of your own plans. But once you get married, your spouse becomes your priority. First and foremost, you have God and you have them, and then is you down the list about 4 things. It's giving up the right to priority. Next, it's giving up the right to ownership. What that means is what you own, you all own. Marriage is not 50-50, it's 100%. It's saying, hey, whatever finances, whatever I have is ours. We're co-owners, we're co-contributors, we're co-administrators to all of this. Like, this is my body, but this is your body. We share in this. We are 2 flesh becoming one. A great verse that all of the guys really like is Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians 7:4. And Nate didn't mention it last week, so I got to bring it this week. It says, for the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Amen. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. This is a first service for somebody to say that. It's true. Let me finish. We're back to the first part of the verse, okay? This is like my life verse. I actually have it tattooed on my chest. And They make me wear a vest. They said I wore a tighter shirt a couple weeks ago, and they said it's starting to become distracting, and so I wear a vest and stuff. Could you go to the next slide? I had a lot of oil on that day, and it's not the true me. But as guys, we can say that's right. But what about this, guys? When she says, "Hey, can you help me with this? Can you reach this for me? Can you open up this jar? Can you go grab this out of the garage? Would you be able to do this?" Think about that feeling that you get, maybe as a husband, when you said, "Hey, we don't have enough money to finish our landscaping on the house, so I'm gonna do this, or I'm gonna take up an extra job so that we can take care of that." And maybe the landscaping thing was a really bad idea, but you take ownership and you serve in a way that either you're gifted or not, but you're gonna learn, but you're making a sacrifice. That feeling you have of, I did that for the team. I shared in the gifts that I've been given. We've given up our priority. We've given up our ownership. Another thing we're to give up is our right to privacy. What that means, your passwords, she knows them. Your phone can be grabbed at any time, can be looked at any time. Your computer can be looked at any time. You've given up your right to privacy. You've given up your right to say, "Hey, I get home when I get home. You don't need to know what I did between now and now." So, "Hey, what did you do this morning? Hey, what time did you get back? Hey, I fell asleep last night. What did you do? What happened exactly?" We've given up those rights to privacy. Those are hard things to hear, but these are important things, because here's the deal. When Adam and Eve were in the garden, it says that they were naked and they were without shame. There was no sin. There was nothing separating them. It was full, honest truth. The responsibilities, and I have to go through these quickly, but the responsibilities that we pick up, the first thing is to love unconditionally. I will love you no matter what. We can have a discussion in this conversation, in this conflict, and you are safe. I will love you unconditionally. Next is I will honor you responsibly. I'm going to honor you, and I'm going to do it respectfully. Because here's the thing. I need to share this. I always say this to guys, and I say stuff to guys a lot because I'm a guy and we need to hear it 2 and 3 and 4 times. And sometimes I'm just confessing my shortcomings. But sometimes there's a reason why a man will find himself attracted to work, because he's given honor there and he can't get honor in the house. What gets rewarded gets repeated. And if a man can find his honor somewhere else, first and foremost, he should be looking to it for the Lord, and that should give him strength to bear whatever burdens in his life. But I want you to know it's really important to love unconditionally, but also have this respect and honor. And lastly is a mutual submission, to submit mutually, to say, "Hey, we are in this together." A life that exists that we're going to honor God together as we honor our spouses. These are heavy things and true things. Galatians 6 wraps it up really well for it. Verse 9, it says, "Hey, let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up." If you don't like what you're getting in your marriage, we have to look at what we're giving. We have to look at what we're sowing in our marriage. And guess what? We sow to our kids a lot. We sow to our work a lot. We sow to other relationships a lot, but are we sowing into our marriage? Because I will tell you this. As a farm kid, I know this. Everybody likes a good harvest. Everybody likes a good harvest. Everybody wants to see the good fruit. Everybody wants to see the big mounds of grain come in and watch it just flow into the truck. That's like money coming in. But the real question is, where were you in the heat of the summer? Where were you in the drought? Were you plowing the field? Were you pulling the weeds? Were you sowing the good seed? Because we want the fruit of the harvest, but we have to be willing to do the hard work of the preparation for the harvest. And in your marriage and in your relationships, doing the hard work is worth it. So if you're willing to not give up, you and I need to be willing to work. Would you bow your heads with me? God, we praise you for your word. We praise you for the hope that we have. We praise you for the guilt that you shun aside. Satan wants to destroy and discourage, but you bring light and life to us. You bring to us your faithfulness, your mercies that endure, as we've been in Lamentations saying, hey, we trust that your mercies are new each and every morning. So from this day forward, God, take our hearts of courage, those that have stepped out today in their minds, that are going to step out in a conversation that have been growing over the last few weeks to pursue the things of you. We love you. We love your perseverance for us. It's in your name we ask. Amen.